Have you ever known something so well you could do it in your sleep, only to find your mind go completely blank the moment it truly mattered? That feeling, the hollow pit in your stomach when you're standing in front of a crowd, about to give a presentation, and the words you rehearsed 100 times evaporate from your memory. Or perhaps it's the trembling hand of an artist holding a brush, suddenly terrified to make the first stroke on a canvas, a stroke they have made thousands of times before. It's the brilliant student who aces every practice exam but freezes during the final, staring at a question they know the answer to, yet the answer remains locked away, just out of reach. This strange, frustrating, and deeply personal form of self-sabotage isn't a sign of incompetence. It is not about a lack of preparation. In fact, it often preys on those who are the most skilled, the most prepared, the most dedicated. It's a psychological paradox, a ghost in our mental machinery that causes us to falter precisely because we are trying so desperately not to. It is a phenomenon with a name born from a story that is as inspiring as it is tragic, a name taken directly from the man who became its most famous cautionary tale. Imagine a man who lived his life in the sky. His name was Karl Wallenda. For anyone who knew the world of daredevilry and high-wire acts, Wallenda was not just a performer, he was a legend. He was born into a circus dynasty, and the wire was his inheritance, his playground, and his life's stage. From the age of 6, he learned to find his balance hundreds of feet in the air, a place where for most of us, vertigo and terror would take immediate hold. But for Karl, it was home. He and his family, the Flying Wallendas, were renowned for their seemingly impossible feats. They built 7-person pyramids on the high wire, they rode bicycles across the thin steel cable, they did headstands all with a calm, almost serene focus, and most famously, almost always without a safety net. For Karl, the net was a distraction. It was a psychological admission of the possibility of failure, and for decades, his philosophy proved flawless. He once said, "The wire is life. Everything else is just waiting." He trusted his body, his training, his instincts. His movements were fluid, automatic, a testament to a lifetime of practice that had etched the art of balance into his very nervous system. He didn't have to think about walking. He just walked. But then came his final performance. In 1978, at the age of 73, Karl Wallenda stood on a platform in San Juan, Puerto Rico. He was about to walk a wire strung between 2 towers of a 10-story hotel. It was a walk he had done countless times in countless cities. For a man of his skill, it should have been routine. But this time something was different. His wife, also a seasoned performer, recalled a profound shift in his mindset in the days leading up to the event. For his entire life, Karl's focus had been singular, walking the wire. His energy, his thoughts, his entire being was dedicated to the process, to the art of the walk itself. But for this final performance, his focus had changed. It had warped. He was no longer thinking about walking. He was thinking about not falling. The thought had become an obsession. He would repeatedly tell his wife, "This walk is so important. I cannot fail." He was consumed by the outcome, not the process. As he stepped onto the wire that day, the world watched the master at work. But it wasn't the same Karl. His movements, usually so effortless, seemed tentative. He made it about halfway across, adjusted his balance pole, and then the unthinkable happened. The legend, the man who had defied gravity for nearly 7 decades, lost his balance. For a horrifying moment, he swayed, fighting to regain the equilibrium that was once as natural to him as breathing. And then, he fell. The man who lived in the sky fell to the earth. The tragedy was not just the loss of a great artist. It was the perplexing question it left behind. How could a master fail so catastrophically? The answer lies in that subtle, fatal shift in his thinking. In the years that followed, as psychologists studied the nature of performance under pressure, They gave this tragic paradox a name, ensuring the lesson from his story would never be forgotten. They named it after the man himself, the Wallenda Effect. It is this very dynamic, this internal battle, that we explore here at Mind Decode Explained. We journey into these intricate landscapes of the mind to find clarity and a path forward. If this idea of turning fear into understanding is already sparking a new perspective for you, take a moment to subscribe. We believe that understanding the why behind our feelings is the first step toward healing and growth, and we are here to walk that path with you, together. So, what was truly happening in Karl Wallenda's mind on that wire? What happens in your mind when you stand before that presentation, or sit down for that exam? It's a neurological hijacking. To understand it, we need to think about our brain as having two different modes of operation, a concept brilliantly illuminated by the work of psychologist Daniel Kahneman. Let's call them the autopilot and the pilot. The autopilot, or what Kahneman calls System 1, is the part of your brain that runs on instinct, habit, and deeply ingrained training. It's incredibly fast, efficient, and operates almost entirely outside of your conscious awareness. This is the system that's active when you drive a familiar route home from work, your mind wandering elsewhere, yet you navigate every turn and stoplight flawlessly. It's the system a professional musician uses to let their fingers fly across the piano keys, not thinking about each individual note, but feeling the music as a whole. It's the system that allowed Karl Wallenda to perform breathtaking feats for 67 years. His body knew what to do. The balance, the subtle shifts in weight, the feel of the wire under his feet, it was all stored in his procedural memory, a part of the brain that orchestrates complex motor skills without conscious thought. For the master, thinking about the mechanics of his craft is not only unnecessary, it's detrimental. Then there is the pilot, or System 2. This is your conscious, analytical, problem-solving mind. It's slow, deliberate, and requires a lot of effort. It's the system you use when you're learning to drive for the first time, consciously thinking, okay, check the mirror, press the clutch, shift the gear, gently release the clutch. It's the part of your brain that you use to solve a difficult math problem or plan a complex project. It's the manager who steps in when the situation is new, difficult, or requires careful consideration. The Wallenda effect is what happens when the pilot, panicked by the high stakes and the fear of failure, storms into the cockpit and shoves the autopilot aside. The conscious mind, the manager, tries to take over a job that it is horribly unequipped to do. Imagine what would happen if, while driving that familiar route home, you suddenly started to consciously analyze every single action. Am I turning the steering wheel at the precise angle needed for this corner? Am I applying exactly the right amount of pressure to the accelerator? Should my left hand be at the 10 o'clock position or the 9:45 position? Your smooth, effortless driving would instantly become clumsy, jerky, and dangerous. You would overcorrect, hesitate, and second-guess every instinct. You would, in essence, forget how to drive. This is precisely what happened to Karl Wallenda. His fear of falling activated his conscious pilot brain. Instead of trusting his lifetime of autopilot training, he started micromanaging the process. Is my foot placed correctly? Is my balance pole perfectly level? Oh no. A gust of wind. What is the exact counter movement I must make? By focusing on not falling, he was forcing his slow, clumsy conscious mind to deconstruct and analyze an elegant, integrated, and automatic process. The body, which knew how to walk the wire perfectly, became paralyzed by the conflicting and overly analytical commands from the brain. The result was a tragic loss of the very balance he was so desperately trying to maintain. This phenomenon is something Dr. Sian Baylock, a cognitive scientist and leading expert on performance anxiety, calls paralysis by analysis. Her research has shown that when we are under pressure, Our prefrontal cortex, the home of our pilot brain, can go into overdrive. We start to worry. We worry about the consequences of failing. We worry about what others will think of us. We worry about not living up to our own expectations. This worry consumes our working memory, the mental scratch pad we use to hold information and make decisions. This cognitive overload does two devastating things. First, it leaves less mental bandwidth available for the task at hand. Second, and more critically for highly skilled tasks, it disrupts the neural circuits of the autopilot system. As Dr. A.T. Balak explains, pressure can cause experts to revert to acting like novices, consciously controlling every step of a process that should run by itself. It's crucial here to dismantle a common misconception. The Wallenda effect is not the same as healthy caution or prudence. Caution is looking at the wire beforehand, checking the rigging, and being aware of the wind conditions. That is the pilot doing its job properly, planning and preparing. The Wallenda effect is being on the wire, in the middle of the performance, and instead of focusing on the walk, you're obsessively thinking about the chasm below. It's a shift from productive preparation to destructive in-the-moment over-analysis. It's also not a sign of weakness or lack of willpower. You can't simply tell yourself, "Stop worrying," and expect the prefrontal cortex to obey. The anxiety response is a powerful primal part of our neurobiology. The key is not to fight it head-on, but to learn how to skillfully redirect our attention away from its paralyzing grip. Think about it in your own life. The public speaker who has rehearsed their speech to perfection. Alone in their room, the words flow with passion and clarity. But on stage, under the bright lights and the gaze of 100 pairs of eyes, the fear of judgment kicks in. The pilot takes over. Are my words sounding intelligent? Am I speaking too fast? Did that person in the third row just frown? I must not forget the next line. Suddenly, the beautifully crafted speech becomes a series of disjointed sentences. The speaker is no longer delivering a message. They are desperately recalling a script, and the connection with the audience is lost. Or consider the athlete at a crucial moment in a game. A basketball player taking a game-winning free throw. They have shot thousands of free throws in practice. Their body knows the exact arc, the precise flick of the wrist. But in the silence of the stadium, with the weight of the outcome on their shoulders, the pilot can scream, "Don't miss, everyone is watching, bend your knees more, follow through." The smooth, practiced motion becomes a stiff, mechanical effort. The ball clangs off the rim. They didn't miss because they weren't good enough. They missed because they tried too hard to be perfect. This internal state is a vicious cycle. The initial fear of failure leads to overthinking. The overthinking disrupts our performance, causing a small error. That error then serves as proof that our fear was justified, which amplifies our anxiety. The pilot becomes even more frantic, micromanaging further, leading to more errors, until we either freeze completely or fail spectacularly. It's like trying to hold onto a fistful of sand by squeezing it tighter. The more desperately you clench, the faster the grains slip through your fingers. Karl Wallenda's first wobble on that wire was likely the trigger for this downward spiral. That tiny, momentary loss of balance was all the confirmation his anxious mind needed to scream, "See? You are going to fall." And in that moment, the prophecy fulfilled itself. So, if we are all susceptible to this psychological trap, if even the greatest masters can fall victim to it, are we doomed to be paralyzed by our fears? The answer is a resounding no. The story of Karl Wallenda is not just a cautionary tale, it's a roadmap. It shows us exactly what not to do, and in doing so, illuminates the path toward walking our own wires with confidence and grace. The solution is not to eliminate fear that is an impossible task. The solution lies in a radical shift of attention. The antidote to the Wallenda effect is to learn how to gently guide our focus away from the outcome and back to the process. It's about getting the meddling pilot out of the cockpit and letting the expert autopilot do its job. The first and most powerful strategy is to cultivate an external focus. Remember, the problem begins when our focus turns inward in our thoughts, our feelings, our mechanics, our fear of failure. How am I doing? Am I going to mess this up? The solution is to deliberately place your attention on something outside of yourself. For a basketball player, instead of thinking about their elbow alignment, sports psychologists teach them to focus exclusively on a specific part of the rim. For a musician, instead of worrying about hitting a wrong note, they can focus on the story the music is telling, or on communicating that emotion to the audience. For a surgeon, whose hands must be impossibly steady, focusing on their own potential for error would be catastrophic. Instead, their focus is absolute, directed externally toward the delicate tissue they are working on. How can you apply this? If you're giving a presentation, don't focus on your own anxiety or the script in your head. Instead, find one or two friendly faces in the audience and focus on connecting with them. Make your goal not to give a perfect speech, but to share an idea that might be helpful to this person right here. Shift your intention from performance to service. If you are taking a test, when you feel the panic rising, bring your attention to the physical sensation of the pen in your hand, or the texture of the paper. Focus on the question in front of you, not the grade you might receive at the end. These small shifts in attention seem simple, but they are neurologically profound. They act as a circuit breaker, quieting the noisy prefrontal cortex and allowing the more efficient, trained parts of your brain to come back online. The second strategy is to define your goals in terms of process, not outcome. This is a subtle but life-changing distinction. An outcome goal is, I must get an A on this exam, or I must win this contract, or for Wallenda, I must not fall. The problem with outcome goals is that they are often not entirely within our control. You can't control the difficulty of the exam questions, the decision of the client, or a sudden gust of wind on a high wire. Focusing on an uncontrollable outcome is a direct recipe for anxiety. Process goals, on the other hand, are entirely within your control. They are the specific actions you will take. Instead of, I must get an A, your process goal becomes, I will read each question carefully and spend 5 minutes outlining my answer before I begin writing. Instead of, I must win this contract, it becomes, I will clearly communicate the 3 key benefits of our proposal and listen attentively to the client's needs. For Karl Wallenda, the process goal that served him for 67 years was simply, walk the wire. His focus was on the immediate, tangible act. One foot in front of the other, feeling the wire, responding to the air, holding the pole. His fatal outcome goal was, do not fall. This may sound like 2 ways of saying the same thing, but they create entirely different mental states. Walk the wire is an active, present-moment instruction. It focuses on doing. Do not fall is a negative, future-oriented command. It focuses on avoiding. Our brains are notoriously bad at processing negatives. If I tell you, don't think of a pink elephant, what is the first thing that pops into your mind? By focusing on not falling, Wallenda was, in essence, keeping the image and possibility of the fall at the forefront of his consciousness. He was practicing the very thing he feared. By setting process goals, you bring your focus back to what you can do, right here, right now. You reclaim your sense of agency and starve the anxiety that feeds on a sense of powerlessness. A third, complementary practice is the creation of a pre-performance ritual. If you watch elite athletes, you'll notice they often have very specific routines they perform before they compete. A tennis player bouncing the ball a precise number of times before a serve, a swimmer stretching in the exact same sequence. These are not mere superstitions. These rituals are powerful psychological cues. They are a structured way to transition the brain from the analytical pilot mode to the automatic autopilot mode. The ritual is a familiar sequence of actions that tells the brain, We've done this 1,000 times. You know what to do. It's time to let go and trust the training. You can create your own simple ritual before a high-stakes event. It could be taking 3 deep, slow breaths. It could be listening to a specific song that makes you feel centered and confident. It could be visualizing the process going smoothly. The ritual itself doesn't matter as much as its consistency. It acts as an anchor, a quiet moment of transition that signals to your conscious mind that its job of planning and worrying is over, and it's time to trust the part of you that already knows what to do. Underlying all these strategies is a deeper philosophical shift, one that researcher and author Dr. Brené Brown has so powerfully articulated in her work on vulnerability. The terror at the heart of the Wallenda Effect is often a terror of being seen as imperfect. The fear of failure is fundamentally a fear of shame. We believe that if we fail, if we forget our lines, if we miss the shot, if we get a bad grade, it will be a public indictment of our worth. We are afraid of being exposed as a fraud, as not good enough. This immense pressure to be perfect is the fuel that powers the panicked pilot in our brain. Brené Brown's research teaches us that vulnerability, the willingness to show up and be seen when we cannot control the outcome, is not weakness. It is our greatest measure of courage. Embracing this idea means reframing our relationship with failure. Failure is not an indictment. It is data. It is an inevitable and even essential part of learning, growing, and living a full life. When we can begin to accept that it is okay to not be perfect, we remove a significant portion of the pressure that causes us to choke. We give ourselves permission to be human. This doesn't mean we don't strive for excellence. It means we separate our performance from our self-worth. Your worth as a person is not defined by the outcome of a single presentation or exam. Paradoxically, by accepting the possibility of failure and treating ourselves with compassion, we create the very psychological safety needed to perform at our best. We allow the autopilot to take the controls, because we are no longer terrified of the consequences if it makes a small mistake. We can approach the wire not with a desperate need to prove our worth, but with a curious and engaged spirit, ready to simply engage in the process of the walk. So, how do we honor the legacy of Karl Wallenda? We do not remember him solely for his final, tragic fall. We remember him for the 73 years he spent walking in the sky. We remember him for the decades he lived as a testament to trust, focus, and dedication. His life's work embodies the very state we seek to achieve, a state of flow, of being so immersed in the process that the self fades away. His death serves as the ultimate lesson, a stark reminder of how fragile that state can be, and how quickly our own minds can become our greatest adversary. The Wallenda Effect is a universal human experience. It lives in the space between our potential and our performance. It is the shadow cast by our fear of the light. But we are not destined to live in that shadow. We can learn to walk our own wires. The next time you feel that familiar chill of anxiety, the urge to micromanage, the voice in your head listing all the ways you could possibly fail, I want you to remember Karl Wallenda. But don't picture his fall. Picture him in his prime, halfway across a wire, balanced and serene, his gaze fixed not on the ground below, but on the anchor point at the far end. His mind not on the fear of falling, but on the joy of walking. That is the shift. It is a shift from fear to focus, a shift from outcome to process, a shift from self-criticism to self-trust. This journey of understanding is not a one-time fix, but a practice. It is the practice of gently and repeatedly bringing your attention back to the present moment. It is the practice of defining success not by the absence of failure, but by the courage to show up. The next time you step onto your own high wire, be it a stage, an examination hall, a boardroom, or a blank canvas, you have a choice. You can look down at the dizzying height and the terrifying possibility of the fall. Or you can lift your gaze, feel your feet on the wire, and focus on the single, simple, profound act of taking the next step. What will you choose to focus on? The fall or the walk? The choice, always, is yours.